in this video, we'll talk about how to manage the sponsorships function within Engage. Now, this is quite an in-depth video, so we'll cover a range of topics. But first and foremost, it's important to understand how sponsorships is structured within Engage. There are two key elements. The first is the Engage system, which actually houses the sponsorships relationships between the donor and the beneficiary. And so many of the front-facing elements of how donations are collated, how the connection of the donor with the beneficiary, and other elements related to reporting take place on Engage. However, it's also worth knowing that there is another section within Engage which houses much of the orphan data. And this is where you add information related to the orphan, populating the picture, adding necessary information. And this is accessed from the top left corner where it says Engage and the word Forms. And this will take us to an Umbraco CMS system, which is the content management system, which holds a lot of the data. So first and foremost, we'll cover the Engage section, which talks about creating sponsorships and reporting, etc. And then we'll move on to the data behind that. So the first thing we'll cover is how to create a sponsorship. So assuming that there are orphans or widows or beneficiary data has already been added into the system, how do we create a link between a donor and a beneficiary and at the same time take a donation? So the first thing we can do is we will go to an account. So let's say we search for John Baker. So there are two ways one can add a donation or add a sponsorship. The first is to go to the actual account. So this is the donor, and we can go either to enter donation, or, which is probably a better idea, is to go to sponsorships and go to add new sponsorship. Now you'll see here a number of options. This is a test function at the moment, but we will choose orphans. You may have widows, you may have families, you may have students, and this is dependent upon the onboarding and what was set during that time. But for this demo, we'll go to orphans. Now this will take you to a screen which shows the create sponsorship. So it says John Baker is a donor, and now we're going to create a sponsorship, which is a connection between a donor and a beneficiary. We can choose the date that we want the sponsorship to begin on. We then actually have two options of a commitment type. Fixed term referred to, set amount of time you want the sponsorship to last for, whether it's 12, 24 or 36 months, or however was configured in the system. The other option is open-ended, which means that this sponsorship will continue up until the point that the donor wishes to cancel. And so in this case, we'll start with the fixed term. Now, as you can see, we also have a button here where we can change the scheme as necessary, and the schemes refer to the different types of sponsorship, whether they are orphans, widows, families, etc. Now, here we have a beneficiary which is populated. So in the system pre-populates a beneficiary for ease of use, and it shows that Ali Ahmed, a 13-year-old from Gambia, will be sponsored. Now we have two options on this panel. One is to change, so we can change the orphan if we need to. If we press change, we will get a list of all of the orphans which are available in the system, which are available for sponsorship. And we can choose based on certain criteria. So we may say, for example, that we just want to choose an orphan from Gambia as per the donor's request. We may want a female, for example, and we can press search. And this will give us the females in this particular section. Now, at the same time, we can click on any of these and we can replace the orphan. So we can say that actually we would like to choose Turkey. And so this will show now that Turki El-Yami is a 13-year-old from Gambia. This is who we want to sponsor now. Now, before we continue, there is the option to download the profile. It is possible from here, though we generally recommend that if you want the profile to be sent to the donor, then it should be done via the triggers. And this will be covered more in the communications video, but basically means that when you process this donation, then the system will automatically send the profile to the donor, as opposed to downloading it and then attaching it yourself physically. However, this is also a possibility and you can download from here. Next up, we will choose the relevant themes, and generally these will be restricted to what was set in the back end. And now we can see here that an amount has been pre-populated, which is £30, and this is based on the configuration that was set during onboarding. And because we've chosen 12 months as the fixed term duration, it is saying that this would be a £30 a month times 12, and the quantity is 1, i.e. one individual, which means a £360 accumulated sponsorship amount. So now from here we have the option now to two options, to create and donate. So the difference between create and donate is that the create option will create a connection between the donor and the beneficiary without actually taking a donation. So there may be situations where an organization wants to create that relationship but not take any payment for that. And so the create option is the one which is used, and this is generally not used in the majority of cases. The create and donate option will allow you to create the sponsorship connection, and then you will also take the payment at the same time. And this is generally the majority use case. So once we have chosen this individual for John Baker, we can press create and donate. And this will move us now to the donation page. And so we can go here and we can see that Turkey has now been assigned for a sponsorship. We can go to the top and either keep it as a single donation, or we can make it as a regular giving, as covered in the donations section of the previous videos. Now, once we've gone down, we can see now that there's an amount here, and we can save and continue to payment, and we can add the attributions as shown in the previous video, as well as the card or cash or whatever payment method you wish to use to take the donation. Now, in this case, if we choose, for example, for argument's sake, to take a cash donation, and we press enter donation to process this, we will see now that the donation has been processed. And this is showing that a donation has been made for £360 for this individual sponsorship. You will also notice that the payment allocations have been updated, and there's a communications in process. So now if we go to the sponsorship section of the same account, we will now see that this individual now is currently sponsored, and as you can see, the date has been updated for a 1-year sponsorship fixed term from June 2023 to June 2024. If we now to view the sponsorship, we can see a number of options. Now this is accessible from the individual donor account on the sponsorships. If we press view sponsorship, we will now see a number of options and the basic data of the sponsorship relationship. So we have John Baker sponsoring Turkey, and we have the fixed term, we have the donation amount, we have the components, and the location, theme, and stipulation. Going further down, we can also see the ledger, and so we can see that the actual donation which has been given is £360 with the donation summary. Now the contribution, you will notice at the top here under sponsorship details, you will notice 3 elements: contributions, donations, and a balance. And just to give a quick explanation of this, so the donation essentially is the amount that has been given for this beneficiary, and this could be a monthly payment of say £30 or £40 a month, or it could be a one-off donation as we've seen here of £360. Now the contributions refers to the amount which is owed to the beneficiary once they have been sponsored. So for example, if it has been set during the onboarding that the individual beneficiary will receive £30 a month, then the contribution from the point of when the donation or the sponsorship has started, the system will calculate that this beneficiary is owed £30 every month. And so as each month goes within this particular sponsorship connection, £30 will be added to the contribution total. And so for example, in July, August, which is going to be 2 months from now, this would be £60. So you'd have £30 times 2, because there are 2 months which have passed, which will show a contribution of £60. Now this is important because then it shows when you need to allocate funds to the beneficiary in the future, via the transfer list, it will allow you to see how much is supposed to be given to the beneficiary at any point of time in the year. And this is also reflected then in the balance. And so the balance will show that the donation amount is now 360, and at each time the contribution total increases, the balance will decrease. And so in summary, once the year, or we're coming up to the 11th or 12th month of this particular sponsorship, one will see that the contribution total will be around 330 or 360, and of course the balance will come back to zero. And this will then mean that a new amount is necessary in order to continue sponsoring the beneficiary. And this can be covered more in bespoke training, but it will allow you to manage the orphan sponsorship relationship quite smoothly. Now we have a number of options with regards to the sponsorships themselves. And so we can, from the individual orphan, we can click the down arrow, and this will give a large list of things that can be done. And to go through each of these succinctly, so we can create a new task specifically for this sponsorship beneficiary. So if we press create new task, we can add a task which links directly to the sponsorship if a particular action is needed. Thereafter, we are able to also download the profile PDF, which is also accessible from here, and it is easy to download here. View all reports is an option when an annual report has been submitted, and this will be covered later on in this video. We can also end the sponsorship. So if a donor wants to end their sponsorship, the donor care center can come here, press end, and this will allow them to cease the sponsorship. So they will put a reason, and these reasons can be added from the admin section. So we can say beneficiary is not available. We can add some notes as necessary. And once we press OK, this will create a separation between the donor and the beneficiary. We also have the ability to extend. So when a sponsorship is coming to the end of its time, we can press extend. And what this will do, it will open a new window which will allow you to extend the orphan sponsorship by taking an additional payment. And so this is generally used in the 11th or the 12th month of the sponsorship relationship. We also have the ability to move the beneficiary. So this means to move the beneficiary from this donor to another donor. And so if you press move, then you can move it to a different account, or it can be moved to an anonymous donation. And this is useful if you feel that the donor doesn't really want to, or is not able to continue sponsoring the orphan. However, you want the orphan to be sponsored by somebody else. And so you can click this and select the account that you wish to move it to. And so from here, you can press next and then move the sponsorship as necessary. The other option we have as well is to transfer the sponsorship. And essentially this means that we change the beneficiary. This will change the beneficiary from the donor. So for example, if the beneficiary has reached a certain age or is no longer eligible for sponsorship, we can use the transfer sponsorship to a new beneficiary for us to find a new beneficiary who needs sponsoring, select them, and then we can move the beneficiary, reassign to a new beneficiary as necessary. We can add the reminders, so we can have reminders turned on and off for this particular sponsorship. We can also donate or make an additional donation. So there may be cases where the donor would like to make an additional or increase their donation from the £30 or £40 a month. And so we can make an additional donation, which will go specifically to the sponsorship relationship of the two of this particular beneficiary. Now, before we move on, it's worth mentioning as well that once we have created a orphan sponsorship relationship and we've taken a donation, the system, and it is most likely pre-configured for most charities, the system will also send the orphan pack, the downloaded pack, and the receipt to the individual sponsor or the donor. So if we go to communications, we'll see here that, and so just to see how the profile will look, we can press download PDF, and based on your configuration, this will show the pack. This is a Care Compass, which is a test pack. which will show the individual, and the data related to this individual donor beneficiary will be here. So now moving on to where this beneficiary data comes from. We will now go to the Umbraco system, which is available from the top left. And now this section will cover how we add beneficiary details, how we can export beneficiary information, and other use cases in terms of users, etc. So we click on Engage and then we click on Forms. And as you can see now, you will have some options on the left, and this will differ based on your particular subscription. So if we click on sponsorships, the first thing you'll see, there are a number of different schemes. These are the different types of sponsorship that your organization holds, and again, it will depend on your subscription. If we click on orphan, and you may have different settings, you may have countries, for example, if you operate in multiple countries, let's say the UK, the US, and Canada, you may have different folders for those different locations, as they will hold orphans in each one. But in this case, in most cases, people will just have one option, so they'll click here. And now you'll see a number of countries whereby which are set in your system. And this is where the information of the relevant orphans will be stored. And so generally it's done by country to make sure that everything is arranged accordingly. So we can go now to, let's say, Pakistan, and you'll see a number of orphans in this particular list. Now, to create an orphan, all we do is press create, and we press create orphan. For the interests of this video though, I'll go to one which is already published, and you'll see a number of fields here, the reference, the field reference which your implementing partner or your field teams can input as necessary, the name, and there's other information, the photo which can be uploaded here. It's important to note that the uploading of photo have particular dimensions, and we'll come to this in a moment in terms of how this can be done effectively. So we can go to the priority. You can add the priority. The priority indicates at how far up it becomes available in the engage screen. So if you have a priority of 1 or 2, then these are more likely to come up further up in the list for sponsorship compared to 5. And this is something which can be discussed during the onboarding. Now here you'll notice that the implementing partner or your team now will add the first name, the last name, they'll add the gender. Much of this is self-explanatory, and it's very specific to your own organization. And in some cases you'll have selections. So for example, in this case, you may have in this relationship the ability to add. And so instead of typing something in, you will press add, and you'll see a list whereby you can choose specific relationships. And we'll touch upon how you can change these later. In addition, some might have health, residence, and so we have a number of fields which are normally inputted by the implementing partner or your programs team. Now, once you've implemented or inputted this information, there are two options, a few options here. One is to save, and saving essentially will save the beneficiary, but it will not send it to Engage for sponsorship. Whereas save and publish will save it and it will publish it, sending the data to Engage to be available for sponsorship. And this is how we differentiate between an orphan which needs to be sponsored versus that which is we're just inputting information. So once the orphan has been saved and published, this will now be available in Engage as per the screen we saw previously, where you can select the orphan from a list. Now, whilst we're here, we can also see a number of other options. We can see the report. So if there are any report information, they can be added here. So this is normally the annual reports is a separate function which would require additional training. But here one can add information specific for the annual reports, which come, progress reports. We can also see a preview of the PDFs, which is dependent upon your subscription. We can also see here with the sponsorships tab if a orphan has been sponsored. And in this case, we can see that the orphan was sponsored in just earlier, and it had ended, and now it has a new sponsorship. And you can actually press on View and Engage to see the sponsorship in Engage as well. The Information tab will give a historic view of what has happened, so when information has been published or saved, and this can be used to track any audit trail as well. Now, how do we add the options which you saw previously in terms of the relationships and others? And it's first important to understand why this has been added. Primarily by having drop-down lists to choose information, this keeps the information cleaner and less likely to error in terms of people putting in spelling mistakes and other things. And so one can go to the sponsorship section, choose the relevant scheme, and if you press settings, you will have a list of all of the different types of fields which you want to pre-select particular options. So for example, we had the guardian relationships. So we have mother and uncle. If we wish to add, for example, grandfather, we can just press create orphan relationship, add grandfather, press save and publish, and go back, and this will now be an option in the list. We can also add, for example, we may add health standards, and so we may, or maybe not health standards, but maybe we will add means of support, and so we may say this was a charity grant. So in this particular case, we have added now charity grant to the means of support, and we have added grandfather to the guardian relationships. So if we go back now to the beneficiary, if we wish to change the guardian from the uncle, we can press remove, press add, and now you'll see grandfather has been added. And the means of support, we want to change it to a charity grant, so this can be removed, and we can add charity grant here. And then we can press save as necessary. Now, as discussed, we also have other options in terms of accessing data of beneficiaries from within this Umbraco system. And so one option is to export the beneficiaries and see a list of them. So if we go to sponsorships, and this depends on your subscription and the configurations of your subscription, so please contact N3O if you need this activated. But if you go to the relevant scheme and you go to the orphan and you come to the country that you wish to export the information from, so let's say we go to Pakistan. Now in the top right you will see a few more options. You will see export and import. Export allows you to pull a list of all of the orphans or all of the beneficiaries within this particular list, and import allows you to import as necessary a number of beneficiaries via mass import. So if we press export, now the content type, generally you will see two types. You may see orphan and you may see orphan report, but in this one we'll choose the orphan, or it will be the relevant scheme that you have, such as family or widows. You can choose the format. You can choose whether you want to export unpublished ones as well. In this case we don't want to. And then you will see some metadata. So these are some of the fields that we want to see. We want to see the name and whether it is published. We may also want to see when it was created and who it was created by. Now the property section allows you to select what information regarding the orphan you want to export. Now one option is to select all, or you may say I want to export certain information. So for example, it may just be the information related to the orphan, key information regarding the gender, some of the guardian information, and some health information. Now at this point we can press export, and this runs in the background. And as you can see, you will have a list of the orphans within your system and the relevant fields that you wish to view as well. And this can be manipulated in any way you wish to use that. Now going back to the Umbraco, we also have the ability to import beneficiaries, and generally we advise that organizations, implementing partners, or the programs team, we feel it is safer and it's more accurate for you to add or ask your teams to add them one by one, only because it maintains data integrity and accuracy. However, if you have a large amount that you would like to import, then we can give additional training. But in this video, we'll talk about very briefly how that would be done. So you would choose the relevant country that you want to import information into. So we will go to, say, Jordan, and you press import. Now here, the first point is that what type of information do we want to import? We want to import the scheme data, which is maybe the orphan. And the first thing you'll have here is a download template. You'll click the download template, and this will be the template whereby which you import information into the system. And as you can see here, there are a number of fields, and this is basically every single field which is available in the Umbraco system. And this allows you to input the information as necessary. And what we advise here is to please contact N3O, who can provide some help and assistance in terms of providing some data for you in order to use as a base template. And then it's worth checking with us in terms of before importing any data, just to make sure that you don't import large amounts of data which may be potentially incorrect. And so going back to the template, so now here, once we have inputted all of the information that we want and we've saved that template as a CSV, then we can choose the file from here. We do also have the ability to upload pictures and other documentation if necessary. Again, this is a much more technical element and something which you can speak to the N3O team about. But once you are happy with the file, you can then press import, and the information will go into a queue to be imported. And this can be accessed by clicking on content and clicking imports. And this will show you, we don't have any information here, but it will show you all of the imports files which we have had, which you've actually attempted. And if you were to click on one, it will tell you what was imported and for what reason. If something was not imported successfully, there'll be errors at the end. Again, this is a bit more technical, and we're more than happy to help you in terms of providing you assistance how to import effectively. Another important element of the Umbraco system is adding new users. And again, this is something which you can do yourselves relatively. If you go to the settings, you will see a number of options. Currencies and data hooks are not really to be used by clients, but we have users and roles. Now you'll notice that you'll have two types. You'll have collaborators and you'll have a country here. Now the difference between these two is that the UK or the US, depending on your subscription, refers to all users who use Engage, who have got Engage access. And this primarily refers to the HQ. And so all users who have Engage logins, i.e. that they were created on Engage, i.e. on the Engage platform, will automatically be synced into the Umbraco. And as you can see, the roles which we have here are also set at this point. As for collaborators, this refers primarily to external individuals, people who are, for example, your implementing partners who you want to give access to Umbraco to add the beneficiary information. However, you do not want them to have access to your CRM and all of the sensitive data. And so this is separate and called collaborators. So if you want to add someone who is not part of your organization, but an external third party, we can come to collaborators, and you'll see a number of roles and users. We would have set roles for you in advance. So this is something you can speak to us about. However, if you want to add a new user, you can click users and create collaborator user. And here you would add the name of the user. So John Barrow. We can add the email address. And so thereafter you would add the roles, which would have been predefined, and you can add start content, which again is not really necessary except for in specific circumstances, and you'd press save and publish. And this would then create John Barrow as a user who would have access to the beneficiaries to add the beneficiaries, but will not have access to your Engage system. The final point regarding Umbraco is the concept of reports. And we won't be covering this in this particular video. However, you can speak to the N3O team when you are wanting to start sending annual reports or progress reports to your beneficiaries. This has to be configured according to certain criteria, but once you are ready, we can help in terms of setting the criteria for how the reports will be generated, and then we can train you as well how that will be done. So the final part of this training is an introduction into the concept of lists and sponsorships. And this is quite important, especially if you want to have a good helicopter view of your sponsorship program. So we'll go back to the Engage system. And from Engage, we will go to Data and then Lists. Now, there are two types of report that we recommend. And again, this is quite flexible based on your needs, but the ones that we do recommend is one called a sponsorship list and one which is called a beneficiary list. And the sponsorship list is basically those orphans which are active orphans which are sponsored by an individual. So this gives you your list of all of the orphans which are sponsored and the relationships with the donors. The beneficiary list, on the other hand, is a list of all of your beneficiaries, whether they are sponsored or not sponsored. And so sometimes for good housekeeping, it is good to review both lists on a regular basis and just to make sure that they are effectively being managed. So the first one we'll go to is the sponsorship list, and we have one which is pre-populated here called Sponsorship List 2023. So as you can see, we have a sponsorships list here for 2023, and we have a pre-populated list here. So we can see the reference, which is the reference number of the sponsorship relationship, the first and last name of the beneficiary, we have the donor name, we have the type of scheme, we have the status, whether this is still an active sponsorship or not. We also then have the location, and we have a few other points here. We have the begin on, so when it began, the actual orphan sponsorship, when it is planned to end, has it ended, and we have another column is sponsored. Now, we would generally advise to have the similar setup so that you would have a good global view of all of your orphan sponsorships. The one thing we would add as a filter is sponsored. We would add and say yes. So this essentially says that this list is a list of all of your active sponsorships. And this can be used to track the total number of sponsorships that you have and can be looked at on a regular basis. The other report is the list of beneficiaries. So this has been now looking at specifically your total beneficiary list. So this is not looking specifically at those who are sponsored, it's looking at all of them. So this pulls all of the beneficiary data from Umbraco into one list. And many of the fields are similar. The reference, first name, last name, and this doesn't have donor information because of course they are not sponsored by a donor, but it will have the location and when the beneficiary was created. This status is actually the active and inactive, meaning is it published and available for sponsorship, or is it potential for sponsorship, or inactive, meaning that it is unpublished and it is not to be sponsored. We have the scheme here, and we have some additional information such as the gender. We also have the is sponsored option, and we also have is active, which is similar to the status here. And so this will tell us, for example, your total sponsorships. And so this will be reviewed on a regular basis. We can provide additional guidance in terms of best practice in terms of how to manage your sponsorship program. We'll have some guides available as well as consulting services which may help, or you can speak to our customer support specialist for any advice that you may need in this regard.